The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call the honourable member Andrew Little.
Mr Speaker, it's a great pleasure, of course, to address the People's House on this very important piece of legislation.
Thank you.
Legislation that will affect many people. I address the People's House not in purple, as the Minister has done, but indeed with a heavy heart, nevertheless, because Mr Speaker, this is not a good bill. This is not a good piece of legislation, and in spite of the Minister's best hopes for it, or the marketing spin that she at least puts on it, we do not anticipate that it will have any of the effects that she anticipates for it. I find it interesting that she says, that the Minister says that the bill will put the interests of children at the forefront of the Family Court's consideration of family dispute issues. But when there was a supplementary order paper that proposed exactly that phraseology to make the interests of children paramount, it was rejected by the government. Rejected by the government members. This is not a bill to put the interests of children first. It's not even a bill to put the interests of separating couples first. It's about putting the government's balance sheet first and foremost. It's about putting the government's income and expenditure accounts above all else. It is about cutting cost. That's what's driven this. This bill started with very noble intentions. It started out as a reform process to address the quite legitimate and well-expressed concerns about the Family Court, particularly about delay, and we know there were delays in some cases, and about the fact that the court, or more court time, more judge time, was being tied up in what might be otherwise described as trivial matters. The matters, as the Minister described them in some of her contributions to the debate on the bill, of where little Johnny or Jane should spend a particular weekend or a particular Christmas. And it was quite proper for the then Minister of Justice, the Honourable Simon Power, to convene a process, which was a very good process. It started with a meeting of interested parties here in Parliament in 2011. It followed with a consultation process of those working in the field, those working in the court, lawyers, judges, specialists, families as well, those who had used the system, and it also included an expert advisory group. That was a very robust process, but Mr Speaker, what a pity that the outcome, once the Minister had changed, once there was a new Minister of Justice and she took over, that the bill did not reflect the work that was done through those very important consultative processes. And what came back was a piece of legislation focused on care of the children issues, which is important, and it's nearly 40% of the Family Court's work, but it was about removing the responsibility of the state to ensure good and fair outcomes between couples who were separating and the management and custody of their children. And it not only removed the state's responsibility, but it beat up on the lawyers and the professional advisors who have been involved in that process. And how interesting it was, Mr Speaker, that of the submitters that we had before the committee, probably 80% of them, that included lawyers, judges, users of the court, mums and dads, former partners, who came to this lead committee and said, the person who got them through, who enabled them to understand what was happening, who enabled them to understand the agreements they were entering into or the orders that were being made by the court, were the lawyers. The number of people who said, the parents who came and said, the person who was the most helpful was lawyer for the child, because they were not wrapped up in the emotions of their client. They could hear and understand the children, and they could assist the lawyers representing the parents to come up with a sensible set of solutions. And that's why, Mr Speaker, the evidence before the committee was between 75% and 85% of family disputes were resolved in discussions between the parties and their lawyers. And what has this Minister done with the legislation now in her desperate bid to get lawyers out of the picture to prevent users of the court from having access to legal advice, including by screwing down the right to legal aid, and that's getting harder and harsher for even those who get it. By doing all that, the minister thinks that suddenly, miraculously, couples who are in dispute will quite happily sit with each other in a room and one other person and resolve their issues. And it is a Pollyanna-ish view. We had the sort of address by Marjorie Proops from the minister as part of the debate, who said that people should pull up their socks and pull themselves together and sort it out. It was completely unreal and unrealistic, and it simply does not allow couples going through the devastating time and process of separation to deal with their issues. When people are making agreements that are lasting a lifetime, or at least lasting a large chunk of their lifetime, and lasting for the period of a child's period into a young adulthood, then actually parents are entitled to have access to advice, to understand the legal ramifications of what agreements they're entering into. This bill will deprive them of that. They will be expected to participate in a forum where they won't have access to legal advice. They might have had a small amount of advice beforehand, but not when they are going through the actual issues and wanting to know the legal impact of what they're agreeing to. They won't have access to that. They will be expected to deal with a person for whom they want to end the relationship, or about whom they are grieving the end of the relationship, to deal with that person only with an independent facilitator present whose job then is to help them to understand what they're doing and also to represent the best interests of the children. It will be an impossible task. And it doesn't matter what accreditation regime that the minister puts in place through the ministry or anything like that, it will not be a satisfactory situation for those who are reliant on the system to come up with an agreement to resolve their very difficult problems. And I think, Mr Speaker, it is a great shame that in a day when we are celebrating such an important anniversary of the emancipation of women, the entry of women to the franchise, the beginning of the process of empowering women in our communities, we are passing a piece of legislation whose most deleterious effects will be felt by women, who will lose the voice they have and the assistance and the support they have to deal with one of the most difficult situations in any person's life, man or woman. They will lose that support. Not only that, they have already lost access to legal aid to get assistance through that sort of process, and many women will be left vulnerable and exposed and on their own. This is a shameful day. It's a shameful day for the government, and frankly it's embarrassing to be a member of a House that is passing legislation like this, on a day like this. And so, Mr Speaker, that's why we remain implacably opposed to this. This isn't about effective dispute resolution. This is about a government desperate to cut costs so it can bail out its rich corporate mates, the Tiwai Point aluminium smelter, the Warner Brothers, and all of the rest of them all lining up, Sky City lining up for a handout. This is a government that is quite happy to take money out of the back pockets of the most vulnerable in our community, to take resourcing out of those processes and forums and institutions that support ordinary people going about their daily lives so they can present a surplus next year and look after their corporate mates. That's how cynical this government has become. Well, Mr Speaker, mark my words, it is coming to an end. Our leader, David Shearer, said a train is leaving the station. There's a song about that. There is another song. There is another song.
Get out of the way.
There is another song. The world is changing. There's a new world coming, and we are part of it, and we will bring it about, and it will be about fairness and equity and a community that cares about its people, that looks after its people, that uses the resources of the state wisely and to empower people. That's what we stand for. That's why we are implacably opposed to this dreadful piece of legislation by this shabby tawdry government. We look forward to the day when this will be tossed out and we will have better legislation that will look after families, look after people at their most difficult times and at their most difficult moments.
I